So welcome to this event, which is entitled In Conversation and the Politics of Display. This event is part of Being Human, a festival of the humanities, and is part of the Hub series organised by the University of Sheffield. To start with, because this event is called In Conversation, I would like to talk a little bit about the participants and to allow ourselves to introduce ourselves. So my name is Carmen Levick and I'm a lecturer in theatre at the University of Sheffield. And my partner in conversation is Angelica Sule from Site Gallery. And to start with, I am going to talk a little bit about my interest in the topic of our discussion, after which I'm going to pass over to Angelica to talk a little bit about your interest and where you're coming from and your kind of experience as a curator at the Site Gallery, after which we will talk about some of the issues that we're interested in, mainly issues of accessibility and about ways in which accessibility is dealt with, especially in the space of gallery. So as I said, I'm a lecturer in theatre, and my main research interests are in politics of display. So I'm looking at the ways in which objects and other kind of material issues are presented in museums and galleries. But what I'm interested in is mainly the kind of the narrative that is constructed around these objects and how people perceive those narratives. So what kind of experience is offered to people within galleries and museums. My main interest and the focus of my research is very much in museums in Eastern Europe. So I'm looking at museums that used to be prisons. So I'm looking at politics of display, about violence, about absence and presence, about issues of nation making and identity making within museums and galleries. While researching this field, within this field, I became quite interested in the ways in which people relate to the space of the gallery and how people relate to the narratives that are constructed around these objects. What is the experience that people expect when going to a museum or a gallery? And also, what came out of this research is very much an interest in the idea of access. So what kind of methods, what kind of tools are we using in order to create an accessible space, a space that talks to individuals but also talks to communities, because the communities and how we make communities through galleries and museums is very important to me and to my research. So this conversation is really with somebody who knows a lot about creating these narratives and creating these spaces and allowing communities to interact with these spaces, and that's Angelica. So I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the principles that you use in your curating experience.
Great, thanks Carmen. I'm Angelica Sule, curator at Site Gallery. I've worked in contemporary art spaces for over 13 years now and have variously worked in project spaces, in public spaces, larger and smaller organisations. So I have quite a lot of experience of different spaces and different ways of working. My personal practice in terms of curating is kind of centred around platforming underrepresented artists. So most of my work centres around people, so around care, empathy, community, collaboration. I've been at Site now for nearly 3 years and started with the reopening of the building there, which we'll come on to a little bit later. And Site Gallery is is a contemporary art space that pioneers emerging artist practices, and we do that through looking at a few different kind of vehicles. So we work with moving image, performance, and new media. Through a lot of the work that we do there, accessibility and diversity, inclusion are all very important. They're kind of at the focus of everything we do. So they run through all of our practice, from programming to hiring to making exhibitions and building exhibition spaces. Yeah, I think that's sort of the core of what we do, and then maybe we can get into the ins and outs of it a little bit more.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Angelica. Taking up that issue of accessibility, so what you mentioned, this kind of network that needs to be created between spaces, the exhibitions that you're curating, and everything that kind of is around the space of the gallery, so communities and people. To me, accessibility is very much, or it has kind of two aspects in a way. One aspect is very much connected to what you're exhibiting in the gallery, so how accessible those objects or videos or performances are. But on a different level, or in addition, to me, accessibility is very much about the space itself. So the practicalities of that space. So what is where, how we access it, can we read all the information that is available, where is that placed, how we kind of get to the gallery, for example, and what awaits us in the lobby, for example. So all these kind of there's much more there that can be connected to accessibility than just purely the exhibition that is within a space. So could you say a little bit about what Site is doing and has been doing to kind of ensure a much more accessible space that contains both the narratives that you're exhibiting, but also the practicalities of accessing?
Yeah, so I would say it kind of it started with Site with the building of this new gallery space. So we went through quite a major capital development project just before I started, so around 3 years ago, and the new building opened 2 years ago. So while we were, or the process of planning the new exhibition space, the new gallery, the new kind of public arena, all went through a process of discussing accessibility. So for me, like you said, Carmen, accessibility is kind of embedded into everything we do, into all of the layers, into the structure of the building and into the exhibitions and who we're programming. So on a really basic level, Site is fully wheelchair accessible. There are no steps to get into the gallery, into the building itself. And there are very clear kind of routes through the building that are accessible to people. And then there are other things that are built in that came out of a period of consultation from our last building. So things like we have non-gendered toilets. And that came out of a discussion with some of our communities that didn't feel like gendered toilets were open and accessible to them. So that was something that was built in there. And so this kind of follows through into things like our signage and how people move through the building. So all of that is how large is our text, making sure that people can read things we're putting on the wall, making sure that labels and signage we put is not out of reach for someone in a wheelchair. And then if we kind of follow that through, what also comes into play there is the language we use in terms of accessibility. So looking at the content. And what we try and do at Site is to use language that is accessible. And by this, I mean not necessarily using art terms that people might not understand or be familiar with. So we're talking about dumbing anything down, but we're talking about using language that people understand. I think we are quite guilty in the art world quite often of using quite academic language sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important in certain instances, you know, when we're talking to different people. But in our public spaces, especially, you know, we are a public gallery. We want to make sure everyone has access to that information. And the other part of that is giving as much information as possible. So we definitely have a text that introduces the exhibition, and we have further text that introduce the artworks and might give context around some of the artists as well. And then all of that is kind of built up with information that might be on our website, or a talk that we might do with the artist that will kind of pick apart and explain the practice a bit more. So accessibility is about people having access at every level to the exhibition.
Thank you very much. What I take from what you're saying is really kind of two concepts that I think are very important, and that is consultation and reflection. And to me, these two concepts become essential in kind of ensuring a kind of a diverse space, a space that is accessible to a variety of people. And in my research, I often talk about people and communities who recognize themselves or not in a space. So when they go to a museum or when they go to a gallery, do they actually recognize their own experiences, their own people who are like them, who look like them, who kind of understand the same values that they do in a space like a gallery? And often people argue that a gallery is an elitist space. It's a space, and it happens in the theatre as well, where they say, well, it's not a space for me. I'm not really comfortable with going in there because I won't understand what is going on. Now, you mentioned that you often look at artists who are not represented often, but also you mentioned the fact that you are often presenting in the gallery, for example, videos, performance art, that sort of stuff, which is not the object that people might expect to see in a gallery. So there is no, there is no kind of a material thing that is there and can be engaged with. So how do you kind of work with this apparent separation between kind of the communities that are around you and this feeling that video art or performance art might be considered elitist by the people who might come into the gallery? How do you bridge that gap in a way?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things that happen there, and there are a few things we do. Firstly, Site has a lot of connections with communities in Sheffield and different communities. So one of the things we do is involve those communities in various workshops and talks and things that kind of expand the ideas we're looking at in the exhibition. So, for example, we have a young people's group called the Society of Explorers, and quite often what they'll do workshops that might relate to themes that are in the exhibition, or expand on ways of making. So a really great thing that our participation program does is kind of expose the ways of making that artists have. So there might be projects that look at how to make a moving image work, how to capture video, how to edit video. There have been workshops as well around performance and what live art is and how to engage and how to enact that kind of thing. So on the one side, I think we're bringing communities in and teaching them about those processes to demystify them, so that they don't feel so out of reach. And then I think the other thing we do, which you kind of mentioned, is really try and have a variety in our programme of who we're representing and who we're talking to. So on my part, and I know for our programming team, that really involves a lot of research. It involves going out and finding different people to talk to, finding people that aren't represented in other gallery spaces, and finding different conversations. And this means being quite responsive. So while we might have an exhibition that's kind of fixed for, say, 3 months, what we want to do around that is be responsive and find different ways to talk to people. If that's through interpretation, through our handouts, if that's through a workshop that's happening, or sometimes going out to schools and going out to communities and talking to them in their own spaces. Because I think what you said about the art space itself feeling quite elitist is really a thing. And something that we have to consider there is not everyone wants to come into our gallery space. And for some people, it might take quite a long time to kind of cross that threshold. So in those instances, what we want to do is reach out and go and talk to them and find ways of including them and bringing them into the conversation we're having in the gallery.
I think that's an essential, to me anyway, I think it's an essential part of kind of ensuring that idea of accessibility, but also I think kind of opening up the kind of the concept of performance art, for example, and video art, and kind of ensuring that there is an understanding that these processes and these concepts are not just for some people, there are for many people, and that can be used as a way of kind of expressing individual beliefs, individual concepts and values. And I think it's what I found quite interesting from what you were saying is kind of this engagement of young people with the process of making, rather than just kind of teaching them, oh, you know, this is performance art and this is what you need to kind of understand about it. That it's very much a kind of a hands-on. Allowing young people to kind of experiment with the process, because the process, I think, is very important, and it's often what is hidden from the gallery, isn't it? Because you kind of see the end product, which could be a performance or video art or whatever, but often that kind of making process is hidden away. So I think it's essential to ensure accessibility, is essential to open up that process of making and allowing people, young people and any people really, to kind of experience that process of making and try it out and see what kind of ideas can they fit within that process. So I think that's very important. I know that accessibility has become quite an important topic nowadays, especially with kind of living in a pandemic and kind of thinking about the ways in which people now engage with galleries and museums. So we all know that after or basically before the first lockdown and after the beginning of the first lockdown, many galleries and museums tried to engage as quickly as possible with various online platforms, thinking about the ways in which they can open up to a variety of new communities that they can bring in. But also many galleries and museums consider this online space as a kind of a leveling space, so a space where they can kind of push their own art pieces and objects and concepts to a wider variety of people. How did Site work with these new platforms, and how did you what kind of decisions did you make to ensure that Site is not lost as a gallery within this kind of very kind of a multiple online space?
So I think for us it was again a process of stepping back and reflecting. When the first lockdown came in, I think all of us were quite taken aback, as was the whole of society really, and for us it was quite an important process not to just have a knee-jerk reaction and throw up all of the content we had online and just create this mass of content and information on our website. So we took I don't know, maybe a month, and stepped away and really tried to think about what we wanted to put online, what the experience was for people online that was different to being in the gallery space. Because another thing that I found a little bit, especially at the beginning, was people trying to just replicate a gallery space. You know, a walkthrough of an exhibition being just someone filming the inside of the exhibition space. Whereas actually, you know, we work a lot with digital and new media anyway, and we wanted to think about ways that people could have an experience of art online without being in the gallery and without trying to emulate that. So we started fairly small. We did some things that seemed to lend themselves online. So we did some workshops that were devised by our participation team specifically to work online, and a few of those with artists who'd done that kind of thing before. We had a few reading groups kind of responding to not necessarily wanting to be online the whole time, but allowing people to step away from their screens a little bit. And we started a series of discussions online, talking about various sort of things. One of them was talking about kind of touch and connection in this time. Another one was very specifically around accessibility. And that for us was really important. And this concept of accessibility and this situation leveling everyone out is in part very true, I think. So a lot of people who might not have access to the physical gallery or might struggle to get into the physical gallery for a variety of reasons suddenly have this access to everything online, which is great. But then we've sort of created another division, which is who has the technology and the kind of bandwidth really to be online and to experience all of those things. So that I think has created a different kind of division, a new inclusion, but also a new division. And one of the ways that we as site are trying to combat that, at least for some of our local communities, is by lending some of our resources. So for some of our young people and for some of the artists we're connected with, we've been lending laptops, for instance, so that people can take part in workshops that happen online. And this is a very localized thing. You know, we can't post laptops around the country, but it does mean we're supporting the communities that we would normally support in the gallery. So we're trying to keep that level of support there. I can't remember the rest.
No, but I think what kind of strikes me really in what you're saying is very much a kind of a continuation of principles, really. It seems that you at site, by stepping back, were actually kind of continuing the principles of accessibility and the kind of the decision making that used to happen before lockdown. So it wasn't a complete break between what used to happen in the gallery and then what was happening after lockdown. And I think it's really essential, because my experience of lockdown and of seeing almost a kind of a saturation of images and kind of processes just kind of thrown online, there becomes, I think, a point where you're fatigued by everything you see, and you don't know. Often you don't know how to kind of choose and how to kind of look through all this mass of stuff that is in front of you, and how to appreciate it, and how to kind of have that experience of really looking at something and enjoying the view, enjoying the kind of the process. So I think, to me, it is very important to kind of slow down a little bit and not be too quick in kind of throwing things online. But it's also very similar to what we experienced as teachers, as lecturers at the university, because we tended to often to kind of put as much online as we could, because we knew that face-to-face teaching and the idea of presence, and that important element of presence, could not be done anymore. So we kind of tried to put lots of things online, and then our feedback from the students was very often, I'm too tired to look at all this. Can't you just kind of give me one thing that I can look at, and maybe a little bit of explanation around it, rather than kind of throwing everything online. So I think that is very important. But also I think what I'm thinking about when looking at the ways in which online platforms work is what you mentioned, this idea of kind of recreating the gallery, or recreating the experience of being gallery. And we all know, like in the theatre as well, that we have quite a lot of streaming happening. So you can kind of sit in front of your computer and watch a play, but it will never be the same experience that you have going into a theatre space. So can you kind of give some examples, or one example of how you kind of managing to recreate some sort of experience with online platforms, which is certainly different from going to the gallery, but looks at something that is kind of closer to that feeling of being involved in a community that kind of goes and sees something?
So I guess one example of something that we've started during lockdown is, so this was a direct response to thinking about performance online, and our kind of commitment to performance in the gallery space, and how that could translate online, again, without it being these sort of recordings of a performance happening somewhere that is just streamed. So we started a commissioning stream called Fresh Takes, which gives awards 3 commissions to artists from around the world to develop performance specifically for the platforms online. So we had our judging panel, I think, a few weeks ago, and selected 3 artists who are in various places around the world, and will develop with us new performance commissions, but that are specific to the platforms we're talking about. So one of them is a play that happens via Zoom, and that works with all the kind of glitches of Zoom and the backgrounds that you can make. And another one is a sort of almost like a video game kind of virtual world with performances by avatars that are connected to real people that are performing. So what we're trying to explore with those is how you get those certain essences of what you might have in a physical gallery space. So how you think about the body online and how that's presented, how you think about interactions with people, and how can we subvert some of these things that we're so used to looking at, so that we don't get that level of fatigue that we have, that we're all kind of used to. So that's a kind of major way that we're looking at that, and we're thinking about also embedding things that will stay with us. It's one thing to kind of put things online while we're in lockdown, but I think we are really thinking about it as a longer term strategy as well. Let's not lose all the work that we're doing online in reaching people that might not be able to come to our physical gallery. Let's figure out how we can embed that into our practice moving forward. So, the exhibitions that we're working on now in the future will have a physical gallery kind of edition, will be in the gallery space, but we're also working with how they can be represented online, what elements of exhibition can be online, and how can we talk about it online, because I think that we're in this moment for some time now, and it's, rather than it always being seen as a negative, you know, what are the positives we can pull out? What can we keep from these moments moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for kind of mentioning that. We will talk a little bit later about the future, but just to comment a little bit on what you were saying, this idea of kind of creative engagement with online platforms. I think that is perhaps the most essential thing that can come out of lockdown, and the way in which people engaged with lockdown and with kind of online platforms and software, and also this idea of kind of experiencing something else, something specific to an online world that is different from the gallery, but is very much a kind of a creative engagement, rather than just me watching something and doing nothing about it, or just kind of viewing something, but being very kind of passive in a way, in the way in which I kind of experience what I see. So I think perhaps that's one of the most important things that has come out of lockdown for theatre as well, because I know that many theatre companies have started creating pieces for kind of online platforms, and what you mentioned, you know, the play through Zoom, and the kind of the particularities of what Zoom is doing and not doing well. I think are quite kind of interesting to kind of talk about and explore, and I think that's essential. But you mentioned the fact that kind of going into the future, you are thinking about keeping some of these kind of best practice elements that you explored during lockdown, and now we're talking from a second lockdown, a second day of a second lockdown, and I was wondering how do you see the kind of the possible worlds of a future gallery? So where does the gallery stand as an institution, as a body where people can go into and explore, where we kind of are split between the presence in a space and using online platforms to kind of enrich our creative existence. So what do you take forward as a gallery for your future at site?
So I think for me, one of the big things that this has highlighted is really thinking about what the experience of being in a gallery space is. What are the different experiences that we have in a physical gallery space and online, and how do we speak specifically to those things in those spaces? So I guess in part what I mean by that is, are we doing things in our gallery space that could be recreated better online? And if so, then why? So what's the experience we're giving to someone who walks into our gallery space, and how do we make that experience specific to being physical and being present in a space? And there are a few things around that, I think, about kind of collective viewing and community in spaces as well. You know, we are physically located in Sheffield. The gallery will always be there, and that will always be a kind of centre or a hub for our communities, and, you know, communities of artists, of people working, of like various different things in Sheffield that means. But I think now, always moving forward, there has to be a connection with how that manifests in the digital as well, and that those two things support and uphold each other. You know, we're not doing one thing online that is totally different to what we're doing in our physical gallery space, that actually those two things are intertwined, and we find the best ways to show and experience them physically and online. So I think that for us is a big thing moving forward. And it speaks to accessibility as well. You know, we talked a little bit about how being online has made things more accessible for a group of people. And I think we need to, not just at site, but kind of as an art world, kind of maintain that for people. We have a responsibility now. We've kind of opened up this whole world of people being able to engage in a different way, to maintain that and to support that, and not suddenly, you know, once we're allowed back into our galleries, to ignore all of the work that we've built up and all of the work that's happening online.
Yes, I mean, I think I completely agree with that, especially this idea of kind of collaboration between the actual space of the gallery and the online platform, that there is no break between the two, or they're not two separate entities, but they're very much kind of connected to each other. And I do think that if we think about the future of kind of possible worlds for the gallery spaces and museums and theatres as well, I mean, any kind of space that invites presence within its walls, I think it's very important for these institutions to kind of continue this collaboration between their online presence and their kind of physical presence, a building. And I think losing either would be wrong in a way, because I think there needs to be that kind of relationship, really strong relationship between what is happening online and the kind of the physical space of the gallery. And that's why I think what Site is doing is really kind of coming, I mean, from what you're saying, I kind of see a through line from the very beginning when we talked about kind of your principles and what kind of principles you're using for creating exhibitions, is very much this idea of kind of reflecting and consulting and thinking about best practice and how best practice can be used both in kind of live face-to-face spaces, but also online, that there is no gap between the two, that there is no that there is always a kind of a collaboration between the two. And I see the way in which these principles are kind of repeated both through your experience in lockdown, but also your kind of view of the future and how the future kind of plays out. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think we all hope that that we will be able to go back into galleries very soon, that we will be able to kind of experience the exhibitions, but also that we have that extra element of online platforms where we can experience a different kind of art, a different kind of community. And I think that is perhaps the most important thing that comes out of this experience of COVID, not only in connection with accessibility, but also in connection to the kind of the future of the art world, which suffered quite a lot, I think, during lockdown. Art and culture was, sometimes I felt that it wasn't considered to be as important as other kind of parts of our lives. So I think that is perhaps, you know, the most important thing. Before we kind of end our conversation, is there anything in addition to what we talked about that you would like to mention as a kind of a rounding up of our ideas?
I guess for me, a lot of what you have said in summing up, I agree with. I think for me, it's been really important to think about the arts community in this moment, you know, and I'm thinking about artists and art workers as well, and how difficult this has been. While it's presented a lot of opportunities, presented a huge amount of challenges, and I think that there is going to need to be a lot of support for our gallery spaces. You know, I don't know about you, but what I have really missed being in a gallery, and I find I love a lot of the things that I have online, and I think there's a lot of space for that. But I think, as we've said before, those two things sit together. And I think we are always going to want and need some kind of physical, tactile engagement with the arts. And so that's a really important thing for me, that we kind of hold on to both of those things. and take them forward.
I think so. Thank you very much, Angelica. I do think so. I do think that that's, you know, the essential. It's something that we can hope for, I think, for the future. And I think, kind of rounding it up, I would like to thank you very much for your input and for presenting us with your ideas and the principles that site is built on. And in the hope that we can soon kind of experience spaces together. And I think that togetherness, I think, for me is quite important. You know, even going to a theatre or going to a gallery, it's important to kind of meet people and share with people your experience. So perhaps it's a little bit difficult. I find that a little bit difficult online, even if I participate in something that's very kind of creative and engaging. I'm still on my own in my office, let's say. So I think, in the hope that we can soon participate and engage with other people and with galleries and theatres, we'll end it here. I'd like to thank you very much for your participation and for our discussion, and I hope to do it again sometime soon. So thank you very much, Angelica, and thank you all for attending and listening to our talk.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.